The thundering hooves shook the earth like an earthquake, and Olivia Osborn felt her heart seize in terror as 2,000 pounds of stampeding cattle bore down on her fallen body, dust rising in choking clouds that blotted out the late afternoon sun over Agua Caliente, Arizona, in the scorching summer of 1882. She had been crossing the main street with her basket of supplies when a rattlesnake had spooked the herd being driven through town, and in the chaos, she had tripped over her own skirts and gone down hard on the packed dirt. Time seemed to slow as she looked up at the wall of horns and wild eyes rushing toward her, knowing she had only seconds left in this world. Her 22 years would end here in the dust, and she would never see another sunrise over the desert mountains or feel the cool relief of evening after a blistering day. Then strong hands grabbed her around the waist, and she was airborne, flying sideways as a powerful body collided with hers and rolled them both clear of the stampede. They tumbled together in a tangle of limbs and fabric, coming to rest against the wooden walkway outside the general store, just as the cattle thundered past, where she had been lying mere heartbeats before. The ground shook beneath them, and dirt peppered her face and hair as the herd rushed by in a deafening roar of hooves and bellowing animals. When the last steer had passed and the drovers had chased after them down the street, whooping and shouting to regain control, Olivia found herself pinned beneath a man she had never seen before. His hat had been knocked off in the rescue, revealing dark hair the color of coffee, and eyes so green they reminded her of the rare grass that grew near the springs after a good rain. His chest heaved against hers as he caught his breath, and she could feel the rapid beating of his heart through the fabric of his dusty shirt. "Are you hurt, miss?" His voice was deep and rough, tinged with concern as he quickly pushed himself up, taking his weight off her, but keeping one hand protectively on her shoulder. Olivia tried to speak, but her throat was dry with dust and shock. She coughed, and he immediately helped her sit up, his movements gentle despite the obvious strength in his calloused hands. When she finally found her voice, it came out shakier than she would have liked. "You saved my life today, sir." He looked at her with those remarkable green eyes, and something passed between them in that moment. Something electric and undefined that made her forget about the near-death experience she had just survived. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, not mocking but warm, and he reached out to brush some of the dust from her shoulder with surprising tenderness. "Could not have lived with myself if I had just stood by and watched, miss. Name is Grant Jacobson. I just rode into town about an hour ago." "Olivia Osborn," she managed, accepting his hand as he helped her to her feet. Her legs felt unsteady, whether from the shock or his proximity, she could not say. "I owe you everything." "You owe me nothing," Grant said firmly, but he did not let go of her hand right away. "Though I would appreciate it if you could point me toward the nearest boarding house. I am looking for work in these parts and need a place to stay." Before Olivia could answer, a crowd had gathered around them, townsfolk rushing over to make sure she was unharmed. Mrs. Henderson from the bakery fussed over her, checking for injuries, while old Mr. Chen from the laundry retrieved her scattered supplies from the street. But Olivia's attention remained fixed on the stranger who had appeared out of nowhere to save her life. "My father runs the Silver Creek Ranch about 5 miles north of town," she heard herself saying, her voice growing stronger. "We are always looking for capable ranch hands, and we have a bunkhouse. If you are looking for honest work, I could speak to him on your behalf." Grant's expression shifted, gratitude mixing with something else she could not quite read. "I would appreciate that more than you know, Miss Osborn. I have been riding for 3 weeks looking for a place to settle and earn my keep." Mrs. Henderson interjected then, insisting that Olivia needed to sit down and have some water, that she had suffered a terrible shock. But Olivia waved off the concern, her eyes still locked on Grant's face. There was something about him that called to her, something beyond gratitude for the rescue. She had never believed in fate or destiny before, but standing there in the settling dust with his hand still warm around hers, she wondered if, perhaps, the old stories her mother used to tell about souls recognizing each other across time and distance might hold some truth after all. "Come by the ranch tomorrow morning," she said, finally releasing his hand with reluctance. "Ask for Samuel Osborn, tell him I sent you, and he will give you a fair hearing." Grant nodded, retrieving his battered hat from where it had landed near the water trough. "I will be there at first light, Miss Osborn, and I am glad you are safe." He tipped his hat to her and walked away, leading a paint horse she had not noticed before from where it was tied outside the saloon. She watched him go, her heart still racing, but no longer from fear. Mrs. Henderson was talking at her, something about hot tea and lying down, but Olivia barely heard. Her mind was replaying those few seconds when Grant had held her, when his body had shielded hers from danger, when his eyes had looked into hers with an intensity that had nothing to do with the stampede. The walk back to the ranch in the wagon she had driven into town seemed to take forever. Her younger brother Timothy, who was 17 and full of restless energy, had stayed behind to help their father mend fences. So she had the ride to herself to replay every moment of the encounter. The desert stretched out on either side of the rutted road, sage and creosote bushes dotting the sandy soil, with the jagged peaks of distant mountains rising against the brilliant blue sky. The heat was oppressive, as it always was in July, but she barely noticed. When she finally pulled up to the ranch house, a low adobe structure with a covered porch that her father had built when he first claimed this land 15 years ago, she found him working with Timothy to break a young colt in the corral. Samuel Osborn was a big man with sun-weathered skin and hands scarred from a lifetime of hard work. He had come west from Missouri after the war, looking for a fresh start, and had built the Silver Creek Ranch from nothing through sheer determination and sweat. "You are back late," he called out, wiping his forehead with his bandana. "Any trouble in town?" Olivia climbed down from the wagon, her legs still slightly shaky. "There was a stampede. A cowboy saved my life." That got his attention. Timothy stopped what he was doing, and both men hurried over to her, concern etched on their faces. She told them the whole story, leaving out the strange connection she had felt with Grant Jacobson, focusing instead on his quick actions and bravery. "I told him to come by tomorrow morning," she finished, meeting her father's eyes. "I said we might have work for him. We do need another hand with the herd expansion you have been planning." Samuel studied her face for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see more than she wanted him to. But he just nodded slowly. If he is the kind of man who risks his life for a stranger, he might be the kind of man we want working here. I will talk to him. That night, Olivia lay in her small bedroom, listening to the coyotes howling in the distance and the soft sounds of the desert cooling after the blazing heat of day. She could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Grant's face, felt the strength of his arms around her, heard the rough timbre of his voice. She told herself it was just the shock of nearly dying, that anyone would feel grateful and emotional after such an experience. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. She had received proposals from 3 different men in Agua Caliente over the past 2 years. There was Donald Reed, the banker's son, who had prospects and education. There was Miguel Torres, whose family owned the largest cattle operation in the territory. And there was even old Jasper Franklin, the widowed store owner. Though he was nearly 40, and she had no interest in being a mother to his 4 children, she had turned them all down, much to her father's puzzlement. He never pushed her, but she knew he worried about what would happen to her when he was gone, especially with Timothy, itching to head further west to California to seek his fortune. The truth was that none of those men had ever made her feel anything. She cared for them as neighbors and friends, but there was no spark, no fire. Her mother, who had died when Olivia was 15, had told her once that when you met the right person, you would know. "It will be like lightning," she had said, her eyes distant with memory. "Like the storms that come across the desert, sudden and powerful and impossible to ignore." Olivia had thought it was just romantic fancy, the kind of story women told themselves to make sense of the practical arrangements that made up most marriages. But now, lying in the darkness with her heart still racing hours after the encounter, she wondered if her mother had been right. The next morning, she was up before dawn, helping their housekeeper Maria prepare breakfast and trying not to watch the road too obviously. Maria, a plump woman in her 50s who had been with the family since Olivia was a child, noticed immediately. "You are nervous about something," she said in her accented English, kneading dough for the day's bread. "What is you jumping at every sound?" Olivia forced herself to focus on the eggs she was scrambling. "A man is coming by this morning to ask Father about work. I want to make sure we make a good impression." Maria's dark eyes sparkled with knowing humor. "A man? Or the man who saved your life yesterday? Timothy told me the whole story." Heat rushed to Olivia's cheeks. "I am just being hospitable." "Of course," Maria said, but her smile suggested she did not believe that for a moment. It would not have anything to do with the fact that you have been up since before the roosters, or that you changed your dress 3 times this morning." Before Olivia could protest, she heard the sound of hooves on the packed earth outside. Her heart leaped into her throat, and she abandoned the eggs, hurrying to the window. Sure enough, Grant Jacobson was riding up to the house on his paint horse, looking even more handsome in the golden light of sunrise than he had in the dusty chaos of yesterday afternoon. He had cleaned up since then, she noticed. His dark hair was still damp, suggesting he had washed at the creek, and he wore a clean shirt, though it was faded and patched in places. His saddle and tack were worn but well maintained, the mark of a man who took care of his equipment. When he dismounted, his movements were fluid and confident, the easy grace of someone who had spent most of his life on horseback. Samuel was already walking out to meet him, and Olivia watched through the window as the 2 men shook hands and began talking. She could not hear what they were saying, but she could read her father's body language well enough to know he was impressed. After a few minutes, Samuel gestured toward the barn and corrals, and the 2 men walked that direction together. "Go," Maria said, shooing her toward the door. "Take them some coffee. It would be rude not to offer hospitality." Olivia shot her a grateful look and quickly poured 3 cups of the strong black coffee her father preferred. She carried them outside on a wooden tray, walking carefully to avoid spilling. The morning air was still cool, a brief respite before the heat of the day set in. In a few hours, the temperature would climb above 100 degrees, but for now it was almost pleasant. She found the men in the main corral, where Grant was examining the horses with an expert eye. He looked up when she approached, and that same jolt of connection shot through her, making her steps falter slightly. "Morning, Miss Osborn," he said, tipping his hat. "I was just telling your father about my experience with horses and cattle. I grew up on a ranch in Texas, worked cattle drives for 5 years, before deciding to look for something more permanent." "Texas is a long way from Arizona," Samuel observed, accepting the coffee Olivia offered. "What brought you west?" Grant's expression grew shadowed. "My family's ranch was lost, bank foreclosed after a bad winter, and disease took half the herd. My parents decided to head back east to live with my mother's sister in Tennessee, but I wanted to stay out here. This is the only life I know, and I am good at it." There was no self-pity in his voice, just simple statement of fact, and Olivia saw her father nod in understanding. Samuel had his own story of loss and starting over. It was part of what had driven him west after the war. "Can you break a horse without breaking its spirit?" Samuel asked, the question seemingly casual, but Olivia knew it was anything but. Her father believed strongly in treating animals with respect, and he had no patience for the brutal methods some cowboys employed. Grant's green eyes lit up. "That is the only way worth doing it, sir. A horse that trusts you will work twice as hard and 3 times as smart as one that fears you. Same goes for cattle. You can drive them with whips and shouting, or you can learn to move with them, understand what spooks them and what calms them. I prefer the latter." Samuel smiled, the first genuine smile Olivia had seen from him in weeks. "You are hired, son. Pay is $30 a month plus room and board in the bunkhouse. We have got 2 other hands, both good men. Tom Chen has been with me for 10 years, and Jake Wilson for 5. They will show you the ropes around here." Relief washed over Grant's face, and he shook Samuel's hand firmly. "Thank you, sir. I promise you will not regret this." "See that I do not," Samuel said, but his tone was warm. "Olivia, why do not you show Mr. Jacobson to the bunkhouse and introduce him to the others? I need to ride out and check on that water situation in the north pasture." Olivia's pulse quickened at the prospect of time alone with Grant, even for the short walk to the bunkhouse. She nodded, trying to appear calm and collected. "Of course, father." As Samuel headed toward the barn to saddle his horse, Olivia led Grant across the yard toward the long, low building that housed the ranch hands. The morning sun was climbing higher now, already beginning to warm the air. She was acutely aware of Grant walking beside her, matching his longer stride to hers. "Thank you again for speaking to your father on my behalf," he said quietly. "I have been to 5 other ranches in the past week, and nobody was hiring. I was starting to worry I would have to head further north, or give up ranching altogether." "I meant what I said yesterday," Olivia replied, glancing at him. "I owe you my life. It was the least I could do." "You do not owe me anything," Grant said firmly. "Any decent person would have done the same. But not everyone would have reacted fast enough," she pointed out. "You did not hesitate. Most people would have frozen." He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. "Truth is, I did not think about it. I just saw you in danger and moved. It was only after, when I was making sure you were all right, that I realized how close it had been." They reached the bunkhouse, and Olivia pushed open the door. Inside, it was dim and cooler than outside, with 6 bunks lining the walls, a pot-belly stove in the center for winter warmth, and a rough wooden table with chairs. 2 of the bunks were clearly occupied, with personal belongings stowed neatly beneath them. The others were stripped bare. "You can take any of the empty bunks," Olivia said, suddenly feeling awkward in the masculine space. "Tom and Jake are out riding fence line this morning, but they will be back by noon. Maria, our housekeeper, will bring lunch out to all of you." Grant set his saddlebags on one of the bunks near the window and turned to face her. In the dimmer light, his eyes looked darker, more intense. "Miss Osborn, can I ask you something?" "Of course." He hesitated, seeming to search for words. "Yesterday, when we were on the ground after the stampede, did you feel—" He stopped, shaking his head. "Never mind, it is not my place." Olivia's heart hammered in her chest. She knew what he had been about to ask because she had felt it too, that inexplicable pull between them, but propriety demanded she not acknowledge it, not when they had only just met, not when he now worked for her father. Still, the words came out before she could stop them. "I felt it," she said quietly. "I do not understand it, but I felt it too." The air between them seemed to crackle with tension. Grant took a step toward her, then stopped himself, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "I should not have said anything. You are my employer's daughter, and I need this job. I have no right to—" "You have every right to speak your mind," Olivia interrupted. "But you are correct that we should be careful. My father is a fair man, but he is also protective. We barely know each other." "Then perhaps we should remedy that," Grant said, his voice low. "Get to know each other properly, I mean, as friends, if nothing else." Olivia nodded, though the word friends felt inadequate for what was building between them. "I would like that." She left him then, before she could say or do something foolish, and walked back across the yard with her thoughts in turmoil. Maria took one look at her face when she entered the kitchen and smiled knowingly, but said nothing, for which Olivia was grateful. The next few weeks fell into a pattern that was both wonderful and torturous. Grant proved to be everything he had claimed, an exceptional ranch hand, with an intuitive understanding of animals and land. He worked harder than anyone, always the first up in the morning and the last to turn in at night. Tom and Jake quickly accepted him, and Olivia often heard their laughter drifting from the bunkhouse in the evenings. But it was the stolen moments between her and Grant that made her days feel alive in a way they never had before. He found excuses to come to the main house, volunteering to help with repairs or to deliver messages from the other hands. She found reasons to bring water and supplies out to wherever the men were working. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their views on everything from politics to poetry. She learned that he loved to read, though he had few opportunities for it, and she began lending him books from her father's small library. He told her about growing up in Texas, about his younger sister who had died of fever when she was 10, about the pain of watching his family lose everything they had worked for. She shared her own grief over losing her mother, her worries about the future, her secret dream of one day seeing the ocean, though it seemed impossibly far away. Every conversation drew them closer, and the attraction between them grew harder to ignore. Sometimes their hands would brush as she handed him a cup of water, and the touch would linger a moment too long. Other times she would catch him watching her from across the yard, with an expression that made her breath catch. But they were careful, always aware of the other ranch hands, of Mariah's knowing eyes, of her father's presence. Samuel seemed to approve of Grant, which was both a relief and a complication. He began relying on the younger man more and more, sending him on important errands to town, asking his opinion on ranch decisions. Olivia knew her father well enough to suspect he had noticed the connection between her and Grant, but he said nothing, which could mean he was waiting to see how things developed, or that he disapproved and was hoping it would fade. Then came the day in late August when everything changed. The heat had been particularly brutal, with temperatures well over 100 degrees for a solid week. The cattle were restless, and water was becoming a concern. Samuel decided to move part of the herd to a pasture closer to the mountains, where a reliable spring provided year-round water. Grant, Tom, and Jake rode out early in the morning with 50 head of cattle, planning to be gone for 3 days to make the drive and get the herd settled. Olivia felt a hollow ache in her chest watching Grant ride away, and she realized with startling clarity that what she felt for him had gone far beyond attraction or gratitude. She was falling in love with him, deeply and irrevocably, and the thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. On the second day of their absence, trouble arrived in the form of Donald Reed. The banker's son rode up to the ranch in a fancy buggy, dressed in a suit despite the heat, his pale face already reddening in the sun. Olivia suppressed a sigh when she saw him. She had thought her rejection had been clear enough months ago, but apparently he was not ready to give up. "Miss Osborn," he said, climbing down from the buggy with careful movements, as if afraid of dirtying his expensive clothes. "I hope I am not intruding. I was hoping we could speak." There was no polite way to refuse, so Olivia invited him to sit on the porch where there was at least shade and the faint hope of a breeze. Maria brought out lemonade, her expression disapproving. She had never liked Donald. "I will get straight to the point," Donald said after they had exchanged awkward pleasantries. "My father is expanding his banking interests, and we are looking to invest in promising ranching operations. The Silver Creek Ranch has a good reputation, but I understand your father has been struggling with some of the debt from last year's expenses." Olivia stiffened. She knew things had been tight financially. Last winter had been harder than expected, and they had lost some cattle to disease. But she had not realized it was common knowledge. "I am not aware of the details of my father's finances, Mr. Reed." "Of course not," Donald said smoothly. "That is why I wanted to speak with you. I have a proposition that could solve multiple problems at once. If you would consent to marry me, my father would be willing to forgive the ranch's debt entirely and provide additional capital for expansion. Your father would maintain complete control of operations, but the financial burden would be lifted." For a moment, Olivia could only stare at him in disbelief. "You are trying to buy me?" Donald had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I would not phrase it that way. I am offering a mutually beneficial arrangement. You need financial security, and I need a wife. We have known each other for years. It would be a comfortable match." "I do not love you," Olivia said bluntly. "I have never loved you, and I never will. I will not marry someone I do not love, regardless of the financial incentive." "Love is a luxury, Miss Osborn," Donald said, his tone cooling. "In the real world, practical considerations matter more. Talk to your father. See what he thinks about this offer." He left shortly after, and Olivia sat on the porch feeling sick to her stomach. When Samuel returned that evening, she told him about the conversation. To her relief, his face darkened with anger. "That presumptuous fool," he muttered. "Yes, we have some debt, but nothing I cannot manage. I would never sell my daughter like chattel, no matter how difficult things got. You will marry for love, Livy, or you will not marry at all. That is your choice always." Tears of relief and love for her father stung Olivia's eyes. She hugged him tightly, grateful beyond words for his support. But that night, lying in bed, she could not stop thinking about what Donald had said about the ranch's financial struggles. She knew how hard her father worked, how much the Silver Creek Ranch meant to him. If she married someone wealthy, it would ease his burdens considerably. But the only person she wanted to marry was a cowboy who worked for $30 a month and owned little more than his horse and saddle. She had no idea if Grant felt the same way about her, if the connection she felt was strong enough to overcome the practical realities of their situation. And even if it was, how could they build a life together when he had nothing and she could offer little more? When the men returned from the cattle drive 2 days later, dusty and exhausted but successful, Olivia's heart soared at the sight of Grant riding into the yard. He looked tired, with several days of beard stubble darkening his jaw, but his eyes found hers immediately, and the smile that crossed his face made her forget every worry and doubt. That evening, after dinner, and after the other hands had settled in for the night, Grant found her on the porch where she often sat to catch the cooler air. The stars were brilliant overhead, undimmed by any city lights, scattered across the sky in drifts of silver. He sat down beside her on the steps, not too close, but near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I missed you," he said quietly, staring out at the desert landscape silvered by starlight. "Those 3 days felt like 3 weeks." "I missed you too," Olivia admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Grant turned to look at her, and in the moonlight, his expression was serious, almost pained. Olivia, I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. Can you do that? She nodded, her heart beginning to race. I know I have no right to speak like this, he began, his words careful and measured. I am a ranch hand with nothing to my name but a horse and some worn-out tack. You are the boss's daughter, and you deserve someone who can give you security, comfort, all the things you are accustomed to. But these past weeks getting to know you have been the best of my life. You are intelligent and kind and brave, and when I look at you, I see my future. I see a home, not just a place to sleep, but a real home. I see laughter and partnership and everything I have ever wanted but never thought I could have. He took a shaky breath, and Olivia realized his hands were trembling slightly. I am falling in love with you, Olivia. Maybe I already have fallen. And I needed to tell you, even though I have no right to. Even though I cannot offer you anything but hard work and devotion. If you do not feel the same way, I will understand. I will keep working here and keep my distance, and we can forget I ever said anything. But if you do feel something for me, even a fraction of what I feel for you, then I want to try. I want to find a way to make this work somehow. Tears were streaming down Olivia's face before he finished speaking. She had not realized she was crying until she tasted salt on her lips. Without thinking, without caring about propriety or caution, she reached out and took his hand, threading her fingers through his calloused ones. I love you too, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I have been so frightened because I did not know if you felt the same way, if this feeling was just something in my imagination. But Grant, I love you. I do not care that you do not have money or property. Those things do not matter to me. What matters is that when I am with you, I feel more myself than I ever have. You make me want to be braver, to take chances, to live fully instead of just existing. Grant's face transformed with joy and relief. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. Are you sure? Because once we start down this path, I am not going to want to turn back. I am going to want everything, marriage and children and growing old together. I am going to want to build a life with you. I want that too, Olivia said. All of it. But we need to be practical. We need to talk to my father, and we need to figure out how to make this work financially. I will not have you feeling like you are not providing adequately, and I will not have people saying I'm married beneath myself. I do not give a damn what people say, Grant said fiercely. But you are right about talking to your father. I respect him too much to go behind his back. I will speak to him tomorrow. They sat together for a long time after that, hands intertwined, making quiet plans and sharing dreams. When Olivia finally went inside, her heart felt lighter than it had in years, as if some weight she had not known she was carrying had been lifted. The next morning, Grant asked to speak with Samuel privately. Olivia was not privy to the conversation, but she watched from the kitchen window as the two men walked out toward the corrals, their body language serious. They were gone for over an hour, and with every passing minute, Olivia's anxiety grew. When they finally returned, she could not read either of their expressions. Her father came into the house first, and Grant hung back, looking uncertain. Samuel found Olivia in the kitchen, where she was pretending to help Maria with the noon meal preparation. "Walk with me, daughter," he said gently. Olivia's heart sank. That tone suggested a difficult conversation was coming. She followed him outside and toward the small family cemetery where her mother was buried, a quiet spot shaded by a mesquite tree. "Grant spoke to me this morning," Samuel began, stopping at the low fence that surrounded the graves. "He told me that he has fallen in love with you and wants permission to court you properly with the intention of marriage." "What did you say?" Olivia asked, her voice tight with apprehension. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on his wife's simple headstone. "I told him that I had suspected as much for weeks now. I have been watching how you look at each other, the way you find excuses to be near one another. I am old, Livy, but I am not blind." "Are you angry?" "No," he said, and there was a hint of sadness in his voice. "How could I be angry at my daughter for finding what your mother and I had? That is all I have ever wanted for you, to find a love that makes life worth living." Relief flooded through Olivia so powerfully that her knees felt weak. "Then you approve?" "I do," Samuel said. "But I have conditions. Grant is a good man and a hard worker, but he has nothing. If you marry him, life will not be easy, especially at first. I want you both to wait at least 6 months to be certain this is not just infatuation. During that time, I am going to work with Grant to help him establish himself better. I am going to increase his pay and give him opportunities to take on more responsibility. If he proves himself, and if you both still feel the same way come spring, then you have my blessing." Olivia threw her arms around her father, hugging him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for understanding." "Your mother would have liked him," Samuel said gruffly, returning the embrace. "She always said you would need someone strong enough to match your spirit. I think Grant might be that man." The next 6 months were both wonderful and frustrating. Grant courted Olivia properly, with her father's knowledge and approval. They took walks together in the evenings, always chaperoned by Timothy or Maria, though both were lenient chaperones who tended to lag behind and give them space for private conversation. Grant came to Sunday dinners at the main house, and gradually he became less of an employee and more of a part of the family. True to his word, Samuel gave Grant increasing responsibility. He put him in charge of breaking the new horses they acquired, and Grant's gentle methods produced animals that were not only well-trained, but eager to work. Samuel also sent him to handle negotiations with buyers in town, and Grant proved to have a sharp mind for business. By December, Samuel raised his pay to $50 a month, with a promise of more if the ranch continued to prosper. But prosperity was not guaranteed. The financial pressures that Donald Reed had mentioned did not disappear, and Olivia could see the worry lines deepening on her father's face as winter approached. There were debts to be paid, supplies to be purchased, and another hard winter could put them in real jeopardy. Grant noticed too, and one night in early January of 1883, he came to Samuel with a proposal. Olivia was there, sitting by the fire with Mending in her lap, and she listened as Grant laid out an idea he had been developing. "I have been thinking about diversification," Grant said, his hat in his hands, turning it nervously as he spoke. "Right now, the ranch depends almost entirely on cattle, but there is money to be made in horses, particularly if we focus on breeding quality working horses. I have contacts from my time doing cattle drives, buyers in Texas and New Mexico who are always looking for good horses. If we invested in a few quality mares and a good stud, we could build up a breeding program that would provide additional income." Samuel leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "That requires capital we do not have much of right now." "I know," Grant said, "but I have been saving every penny of my pay. I have almost $300 set aside. I would like to invest it in the ranch, become a partner in the horse breeding operation. We split the costs and the profits. I know it is not much, but it is a start." Olivia felt a surge of love for Grant, so powerful it nearly overwhelmed her. $300 was everything he had, his entire security, and he was willing to risk it on her father's ranch. Samuel seemed to understand the significance as well. His expression softened, and he nodded slowly. "That is a generous offer, son. More than generous. But if I accept, you need to understand the risks. If the operation fails, you could lose everything." "I understand," Grant said firmly. "But I believe in this ranch, and I believe in you, sir. More importantly, I want to be a man worthy of marrying your daughter. I want to be able to provide for her, to give her security. This is how I can do that." "Then we have a deal," Samuel said, standing to shake Grant's hand. "Partners in the horse breeding operation. We will draw up proper papers to make it official." That night, when Grant walked Olivia out to the porch before heading back to the bunkhouse, his joy was evident. "Do you see?" he said, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes bright even in the darkness. "We are building something, Olivia. Building a future. Come spring, I am going to ask you to marry me properly, and I am going to have something to offer you besides just my heart." "Your heart is all I need," Olivia said, but she understood what he meant. He needed to feel like a provider, like a man who could take care of his family. It was important to him, to his sense of self-worth, and she loved him all the more for it. Winter passed into spring, and the horse breeding operation began to take shape. Grant traveled to Texas with the money they had pooled, along with additional funds from selling off some older cattle, and returned with 3 beautiful mares and a magnificent bay stallion with excellent bloodlines. He worked with them patiently, and by April, all 3 mares were in foal. The ranch itself seemed to come alive with new energy. Samuel's worry lines eased as the horses attracted interest from buyers throughout the territory. Timothy, inspired by Grant's dedication, became more focused on the ranch work and less obsessed with running off to California. Even Maria seemed happier, humming old songs as she worked and clearly delighted by the romance blossoming under the ranch's roof. On a warm evening in early May, exactly 6 months after Samuel had given his conditional approval, Grant asked Olivia to walk with him. Instead of their usual route around the property, he led her up into the foothills, where a small spring fed a pool surrounded by cottonwood trees. The water glinted in the late afternoon sun, and wildflowers dotted the grass, yellow and purple and white. "This is beautiful," Olivia said, looking around in wonder. "I did not know this place existed." "I found it a few weeks ago while tracking a stray calf," Grant said. He took both her hands in his, and she could feel them trembling slightly. "Olivia, these past 6 months have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you, to really know you, has only made me more certain that you are the person I want to spend my life with. You are strong and smart and funny, and you challenge me to be better than I am. When I think about the future, all I see is you." He released her hands and dropped to one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold band with a small diamond, modest but beautiful. "I know it is not much," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "but it is honest money, earned through hard work. Olivia Osborn, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner and the mother of my children? Will you build a life with me, whatever it holds?" Tears streamed down Olivia's face as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment through her joy. When she finally found her voice, it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times. Yes." Grant stood and slid the ring onto her finger, and then he was kissing her, really kissing her for the first time. His lips were warm and gentle against hers, and she felt as if she might dissolve from the sheer happiness of the moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "I have loved you since the moment I pulled you from that stampede, maybe even before, in some life I do not remember. It feels like I have been looking for you my whole life." "I love you too," Olivia said, "and I cannot wait to marry you." They set the wedding for June, giving them just enough time to make preparations without waiting so long that the summer heat would be unbearable. The ceremony would be simple, held at the ranch with the local preacher officiating, but Olivia did not care about elaborate decorations or expensive clothes. All that mattered was that she would become Grant's wife. Maria threw herself into preparations with enthusiasm, enlisting the help of women from town to sew a dress and make food for the celebration. Timothy took on extra chores without complaint, happy to see his sister so obviously in love. Samuel worked with Grant to build a small cottage near the main house, a 2-room structure with a bedroom and living area where the newlyweds could start their life together. The night before the wedding, Samuel asked to speak with Olivia privately. They sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Your mother would have been so proud of you," he said quietly. "You have become such a strong woman, stronger than I think you even realize. And you have chosen a good man to stand beside you." "I learned from the best example," Olivia said, leaning her head against her father's shoulder. "You and Mother showed me what real partnership looks like. I know Grant and I will face challenges, but I am not afraid because I know we will face them together." Samuel was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough. "There is something I need to tell you. I have been planning to wait until after the wedding, but you deserve to know now. The horse breeding operation has been even more successful than we hoped. We had a buyer from the cavalry come through last week, interested in purchasing horses for the army. The contract he is offering would pay off all the ranch's debts and provide substantial capital for expansion." Olivia sat up straight, her eyes wide. "Father, that is wonderful news. Why did you not say anything?" "Because the timing felt wrong, with the wedding coming up. I did not want to overshadow your special day. But there is more. I have been thinking about the future, about what happens to this ranch when I am gone. Timothy wants to go to California. We all know it is only a matter of time before he gets restless again. But you and Grant, you are building something here. You are invested in this place in a way that goes beyond just working for wages." He turned to face her fully. "I am changing my will, Livy. The Silver Creek Ranch will be yours and Grant's. Half ownership. split equally between you. Timothy will get a cash settlement from the sale of the northern acreage that we do not really need. It is not about playing favorites. It is about putting the ranch in the hands of people who love it and will care for it the way your mother and I did." Olivia felt tears welling up again. She seemed to cry constantly these days, overwhelmed by happiness and gratitude. "Father, I do not know what to say. Does Grant know?" "Not yet. I will tell him tomorrow, after the ceremony. But I wanted you to know tonight that you are not just marrying a ranch hand. You are marrying a man who will be a landowner, a partner in a successful operation. I want you to go into this marriage knowing that you will have security, both of you." "I would have married him regardless," Olivia said firmly. "But I am grateful for his sake. He has worked so hard to prove himself, to build something. This will mean everything to him." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, with a cloudless sky and temperatures that, while warm, were not yet oppressively hot. Maria had transformed the ranch yard into something magical, with white fabric draped over rough wooden structures and wild flowers in jars on every available surface. Chairs borrowed from the church in town were arranged in rows, and by late morning, people began arriving from all over. Olivia wore a simple white dress that Maria had sewn, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was pinned up with small white flowers woven through the dark curls. Standing in her bedroom and looking at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the radiant woman staring back at her. When it was time, Timothy walked her out to where Grant waited beneath an arbor covered in flowering vines. The moment she saw him standing there in his best clothes, freshly shaved with his dark hair slicked back, her breath caught. But it was the expression on his face when he saw her that nearly undid her completely. He looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was making the right choice. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. Olivia heard the preacher's words as if from a distance, too focused on Grant's green eyes locked on hers. On the way, his hand trembled slightly when he slid the wedding band onto her finger to match the engagement ring. When the preacher finally pronounced them husband and wife, and told Grant he could kiss his bride, the tenderness of the kiss made her forget that anyone else was watching. The celebration afterward was joyous and loud, with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible. Jake and Tom made speeches that were equal parts heartfelt and embarrassing, sharing stories about Grant's first weeks at the ranch. Miguel Torres and his family came, bearing gifts and well wishes, any past courtship attempt, forgotten in genuine happiness for the couple. Even Mrs. Henderson from the bakery attended, bringing an elaborate wedding cake that must have taken her days to prepare. As the sun began to set and the party showed no signs of slowing down, Grant leaned close to Olivia and whispered, "Can we escape for a bit? I want some time with just my wife." The word wife sent a thrill through her, and she nodded eagerly. They slipped away from the crowd, hand in hand, walking toward the small cottage that would be their home. Inside, lit by oil lamps, it looked cozy and welcoming. Simple furniture filled the space, most of it built by Grant himself with Timothy's help. "It is not much," Grant said, suddenly seeming nervous. "But it is ours. We will make it into a real home together." "It is perfect," Olivia said, meaning it. She turned to face him, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "Everything is perfect because I am with you." Grant kissed her then, deeper and more passionate than before, and Olivia felt herself melting into his embrace. The rest of the night was theirs alone, a private celebration of their love and commitment, and when Olivia finally fell asleep in her husband's arms, she felt more complete than she ever had in her life. The following morning, Samuel shared the news about the ranch's future, and Grant's reaction was everything Olivia could have hoped for. He was stunned at first, unable to quite believe that he was being given such a gift. But then joy and determination set in, and he promised Samuel that he would work every day to be worthy of the trust being placed in him. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were droughts and harsh winters, sick cattle and horses that died unexpectedly. There were disagreements and hard times when money was tight. But through it all, Olivia and Grant faced everything as partners, just as she had known they would. Their first child, a son they named Gabriel after Grant's father, was born in the spring of 1884. Olivia labored through a long night, with Grant pacing outside and Maria attending to her with experienced hands. When she finally held her baby boy, looking down at his tiny face and shock of dark hair, she felt her heart expand in ways she had not known possible. Grant was a devoted father from the moment he first held Gabriel. Olivia often found him in the nursery in the middle of the night, just watching their son sleep with an expression of wonder on his face. As Gabriel grew, Grant taught him everything about ranching, about respecting the land and the animals, about hard work and integrity. 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Margaret, after Olivia's mother. She had her father's green eyes and her mother's determination. A spirited child who kept them constantly on their toes. Another son, Samuel, followed 3 years after that. Quiet and thoughtful, like the grandfather he was named for. The ranch prospered under their care. The horse breeding operation became renowned throughout the territory, with buyers coming from as far as California to purchase their animals. The cattle operation remained strong, and they gradually acquired more land, expanding their holdings responsibly. Grant proved to have not just skill with animals, but a sharp business mind, and he navigated the changing economics of the West with care and foresight. Samuel lived to see his grandchildren grow, to see the ranch become more successful than he had ever imagined. He passed peacefully in his sleep in 1892, surrounded by family, content in the knowledge that his life's work was in capable hands. They buried him next to his beloved wife, and Olivia planted roses on both graves, tending them carefully through the years. Timothy did eventually head to California, but not to seek gold or adventure as he had once planned. Instead, he went to study agriculture at the new university in Berkeley, returning with knowledge that helped them improve their ranching methods. He eventually married and settled on a small portion of the land that had been his inheritance, raising oranges and becoming a successful orchardist. He and Grant became true brothers, their families intertwined and supportive. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the Wild West of Olivia's youth transformed into something more settled and civilized. Towns grew into cities, railroads connected once isolated communities, and the rough frontier life gave way to modern conveniences. But on the Silver Creek Ranch, the important things remained constant. Hard work, family, and the land itself, unchanging beneath the endless Arizona sky. On a warm evening in the summer of 1910, Olivia sat on the porch of the home she and Grant had shared for nearly 30 years. The cottage had been expanded over time, growing into a proper house with multiple bedrooms and a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Grant sat beside her, his hair now more silver than dark, his hands bearing the scars and calluses of a lifetime of ranching. But his eyes were still that same remarkable green, and when he looked at her, she still felt the same flutter in her chest that she had experienced as a young woman of 22. Their children were grown now, Gabriel helping to run the ranch with his father, Margaret married to a school teacher in Tucson, young Samuel studying law in Phoenix with plans to return and help protect the ranch's interests as the territory moved towards statehood. There were grandchildren too, 5 so far, with another on the way, and the sound of their laughter filled the ranch with joy. "Do you remember the day we met?" Grant asked, his hand finding hers on the bench between them, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. "Every detail," Olivia said. "The dust, the fear, the feel of your arms around me. I remember thinking I was going to die, and then suddenly I was not, and there you were with those green eyes looking at me like I was something precious." "You were precious," Grant said. "You are precious. The most precious thing in my life, then and now and always." "You saved my life that day," Olivia said softly. "But not just from the stampede. You saved me from a life half-lived, from never knowing what it was to be truly loved and to love in return. Every day since has been a gift." Grant raised her hand to his lips, kissing it gently as he had done so many times over the years. "The gift has been mine, Liv, all mine." They sat together as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, painting the desert in colors that never failed to take Olivia's breath away. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear Gabriel calling to the horses, his voice strong and sure. Closer, in the kitchen, Maria, now elderly, but still insisting on helping with the cooking, hummed one of her old songs. Olivia thought about everything that had happened since that fateful day in 1882, all the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and struggles. She thought about her parents gone now but never forgotten, and about the children and grandchildren who would carry the family forward into the future. She thought about this land that had shaped her life, this harsh and beautiful desert that had become as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. But mostly, She thought about the man sitting beside her, the cowboy who had pulled her from a stampede and into a life more full and rich than she had ever imagined possible. He had saved her life that day, and she had saved his right back, pulling him from a life of drifting into one of purpose and belonging. They had built something together, not just a ranch or a family, but a partnership that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. As darkness fell and the stars began to appear, one by one, in the vast sky above, Olivia leaned her head against Grant's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. And she knew, with the certainty that comes from a lifetime of love, that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, just as they always had. The Wild West they had known was passing into memory, becoming the stuff of stories told to wide-eyed grandchildren. But the love they had found in the midst of it, born in dust and danger, and nurtured through years of shared life, that would endure. It would live on in the children they had raised, in the land they had cared for, in the example they had set of what it meant to build a life based on love and respect and unwavering devotion. Gabriel came up to the porch, his own wife and children with him, ready for the Sunday supper that had become a family tradition, the house filled with noise and laughter. Multiple generations gathered around the long table that Grant had built when Gabriel was just a baby. There was food and stories, teasing and tenderness, the comfortable chaos of family. Watching her husband at the head of the table, surrounded by the life they had created together, Olivia felt a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. This was what mattered, not the hardships they had overcome or the success they had achieved, but these moments of simple togetherness, of love expressed in shared meals and casual touches and knowing glances. Later, when the grandchildren had been tucked into bed in various rooms throughout the house and the adult children had retreated to their own spaces, Olivia and Grant returned to the porch. It was their time, this quiet hour at the end of the day, and they guarded it jealously. "Do you ever regret it?" Grant asked suddenly. "Marrying a poor cowboy instead of someone like Donald Reed who could have given you an easier life?" Olivia turned to him in surprise. After all these years, how could he even ask such a question? But then she saw the vulnerability in his eyes, and she understood. Everyone needed reassurance sometimes, needed to hear that they were valued, that the choice to love them had been right. "Never," she said firmly, taking both his hands in hers. "Not for a single moment of a single day. You gave me everything that matters, Grant. You gave me love and partnership and a life full of purpose. You gave me children and grandchildren, and you helped me build something that will outlast us both. What more could I possibly want?" Grant pulled her close, and she went willingly into his arms, resting against his chest as she had done countless times before. His heart beat steadily beneath her ear, and she matched her breathing to his, two people so intertwined after 3 decades together that they moved as one. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you lying in that street, and I will love you until the day I die, and beyond." "I love you too," Olivia said. "You are my heart, Grant Jacobson. You always have been, from the very beginning." They stayed there on the porch until late into the night, talking and remembering, planning and dreaming. They discussed the changes coming to the territory, Arizona's push for statehood, the new technologies that were transforming ranching. But they also talked about the constants, the things that would never change no matter how much the world around them did. Family, land, love, commitment. These were the foundations they had built their life upon, and they were as solid now as they had ever been. When they finally went inside to their bedroom, they moved through their nighttime routine with the comfortable familiarity of long marriage. Grant banked the fire while Olivia brushed out her hair, now streaked with silver, but still thick and long. He changed into his nightshirt while she turned down the bed. And when they finally climbed under the quilts that Maria had stitched over the years, each one a work of love and art, they curled together naturally, her back to his front, his arm around her waist. "Good night, my love," Grant murmured, his breath warm against her neck. "Good night," Olivia whispered back, her hand covering his where it rested against her stomach. And as sleep claimed them, Olivia's last waking thought was one of gratitude. Gratitude for the stampede that had nearly killed her, but had instead brought her the greatest gift of her life. Gratitude for a father who had understood what mattered and supported her choice. Gratitude for this land that had tested them and shaped them. But most of all, gratitude for the man beside her, the cowboy who had saved her life and then spent the rest of his own making sure she never regretted living it. The years continued to pass, as years do, bringing more changes and challenges. The ranch adapted to new times, incorporating automobiles and telephones, while maintaining the core values that had always guided it. Gabriel proved to be as capable a rancher as his father and grandfather before him, and young Samuel's legal knowledge helped protect the family's interests as Arizona achieved statehood in 1912. Margaret's children came to spend summers at the ranch, learning the same lessons their mother had learned about hard work and respect for the land. The family grew and expanded, branches extending in new directions, but all rooted in the same soil, the same values, the same love that Olivia and Grant had nurtured from that first moment of connection. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1913, the family threw a grand celebration. Friends and neighbors came from throughout the territory, some of them traveling days to attend. There was music and dancing, endless food, speeches that made Olivia cry and Grant blush. But the best moment came at the end of the night, when Grant pulled her onto the dance floor for one last waltz. He was 67 years old now, and she was 63, but when he took her in his arms and they moved together to the music, they might as well have been young again. The years fell away, and she was once more the 22-year-old woman staring into the eyes of the cowboy who had saved her life. He was once more the drifter who had found a home in her heart. 30 years, Grant said, wonder in his voice. Where did they go? They went into building this, Olivia said, gesturing to the crowd around them. Their children and grandchildren, friends and family, all gathered to celebrate their love. They went into building us, and I would not change a single moment. Not even the hard times? Grant asked. The years when we barely scraped by, when the drought threatened to ruin us, when we lost the baby between Margaret and Samuel? Olivia's eyes filled with tears at the mention of the daughter they had lost. Born too early and living only a few hours, it was still painful, even after so many years, but the pain was part of their story, part of what had made them who they were. Not even those, she said firmly. The hard times made the good times sweeter. They taught us what we were capable of, how strong we could be together. I would not trade any of it, Grant. Every moment, good and bad, led us here, to this life we have built, and it is a beautiful life. Grant's eyes were suspiciously bright, and he blinked rapidly. You are the strongest person I have ever known, Liv, and the best. I thank God every day that I was in Agua Caliente on that specific afternoon, that I was in the right place at the right time to save you. We saved each other, Olivia corrected gently. That is what love does. It saves us from loneliness and emptiness. It gives us purpose and meaning. We saved each other, my love, and we have been saving each other every day since. They danced until the musicians were too tired to play anymore, until the grandchildren had fallen asleep in corners, until the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. And when they finally retired to their bedroom, they held each other close, two souls that had become one over 3 decades of shared life. More years passed, each one precious and fleeting. They watched the world change around them, the territory they had known as raw and untamed becoming more settled and civilized. They saw automobiles become common, heard about airplanes and movies and all the other wonders of the modern age. But on the ranch, life maintained its rhythm, dictated by the seasons and the needs of the land and animals, rather than by the frantic pace of progress. Grant's health began to fail as he entered his 70s, nothing dramatic but a gradual slowing, an accumulation of aches and pains from a lifetime of physical labor. He could no longer work the way he once had, and though it frustrated him, he adapted, focusing on training Gabriel and the grandchildren who showed interest in ranching, passing on the knowledge he had accumulated over 5 decades. Olivia remained strong, her mind sharp even as her body showed the effects of age. She took over more of the ranch's business affairs, her organizational skills, and attention to detail serving the operation well. But her true joy was in the family that surrounded her, in the great-grandchildren who were beginning to arrive, and the knowledge that the love she and Grant had created was rippling outward, touching lives far beyond their own. On a spring morning in 1920, as wildflowers bloomed across the desert and new foals frolicked in the pastures, Grant suffered a stroke. It was not immediately fatal, but it left him weakened, confined to bed, and needing constant care. Olivia became his primary caregiver, refusing to let anyone else take over the duty despite the family's offers of help. "I have been beside him for 38 years," she said firmly when Margaret suggested hiring a nurse. "I am not going to leave his side now." For weeks she tended to him, bathing him and feeding him, reading to him and talking to him, even when he could not respond clearly. The doctors were not optimistic about recovery, but Olivia refused to give up hope. She had fought too hard for this love to let it go without a fight. One evening, as she sat beside his bed holding his hand, Grant's eyes suddenly cleared. The confusion that had clouded them for weeks lifted, and he looked at her with perfect clarity and recognition. "Liv," he whispered, his voice weak but unmistakable. "I am here," she said, leaning close. "I am right here, my love." "Thank you," he said, each word an effort. "For everything, for the life we built, for loving me." Tears streamed down Olivia's face. "Thank you for pulling me from that stampede," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you for every day since. Thank you for being my husband, my partner, my best friend." Grant smiled, that same smile that had captured her heart nearly 4 decades earlier. "Not goodbye," he said. "Never goodbye. I will wait for you wherever I go next, and we will find each other again, just like we did before." "I love you," Olivia whispered, pressing her forehead to his. "I love you so much." "Love you too," Grant said. "Always." His eyes closed then, and his breathing grew shallow. Olivia called for the family, and they gathered around the bed, children and grandchildren, and even some great-grandchildren, all saying their goodbyes to the man who had meant so much to so many. But it was Olivia's hand he held as his breathing finally stopped. Olivia's name, the last word on his lips. The grief was crushing, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe, hard to function. For days after the funeral, Olivia moved through the world in a fog, unable to accept that Grant was truly gone. The bed felt too big without him, the house too quiet. Everywhere she looked, she saw reminders of him, from the boots still sitting by the door to the book he had been reading before the stroke, a leather bookmark still holding his place. But as the weeks passed, the acute grief began to settle into something more bearable, a deep sadness tinged with gratitude for the years they had shared. Olivia found comfort in the family, in the evidence all around her of the life she and Grant had built together. Every child and grandchild was a testament to their love. Every successful season on the ranch, a continuation of their shared vision. She lived another 12 years after Grant's death, staying active in ranch affairs and delighting in her growing family. She saw great-grandchildren grow into teenagers, saw the ranch continue to prosper under Gabriel's leadership. She witnessed more changes, from women getting the vote to the first talking pictures, and through it all, she carried Grant with her in her heart. On a warm June evening in 1932, 50 years to the day after her wedding, Olivia Jacobson passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 92 years old, and those who found her in the morning said she looked peaceful, even happy, as if she had seen something wonderful just before the end. They buried her next to Grant in the family cemetery, under the shade of cottonwood trees that now grew tall and thick. On her headstone, beneath her name and dates, Gabriel had inscribed words his mother had spoken often in her final years. "Love saved us both." The Silver Creek Ranch continued to thrive for generations after, passing from Gabriel to his children and then to theirs. But every member of the family grew up knowing the story of how it all began, the tale of the cowboy who pulled a woman from a stampede and found his destiny in the process. They knew about the love that had sustained through hardships and triumphs, about the partnership that had built something lasting from nothing but hard work and devotion. And on summer evenings, when the desert cooled and the stars came out in their millions, family members sitting on the porch of the old house swore they could sometimes feel the presence of that love still lingering in the air, as much a part of the ranch as the land itself, eternal and unbreakable. A testament to the power of two souls finding each other against all odds and choosing, every day, to build a life together. The story became legend in the family, passed down through generations, embellished perhaps in the telling, but always true in its essential core. It was the story of Grant and Olivia, the cowboy, and the woman he saved, who saved him right back and then spent a lifetime proving that real love was not just about grand gestures, but about showing up day after day, through good times and bad, and choosing each other over and over again. And if you visit the Silver Creek Ranch today, now run by the 5th generation of the family, you can still see the cottage where it all began, carefully maintained as a museum and reminder. You can walk the land they walked, see the corrals where Grant broke horses with patience and skill, visit the cemetery where they rest side by side for eternity. But more than any physical location, their legacy lives on in the values they instilled, in the importance they placed on family and hard work and treating others with respect and dignity. It lives on in every child who learns that love is not just a feeling, but a choice, a commitment renewed daily. It lives on in the knowledge that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a moment of courage, with strong hands pulling you from danger, with eyes meeting and souls recognizing something precious and rare. The Wild West they knew is long gone, transformed beyond recognition by time and progress. But the love story that began in the dust of a stampede in 1882 remains as vivid and powerful as ever, a reminder that some things, the truly important things, are indeed eternal. Love, family, commitment, partnership, these are the things that matter, the things that last, long after everything else has faded into history. And somewhere, perhaps, in whatever lies beyond this life, Grant and Olivia Jacobson are together still, holding hands as they watch the desert sunset, planning and dreaming and loving just as they always did, just as they always will, forever and always. Two souls who found each other in the chaos and refused to let go, building something beautiful that would outlast them both. A love story for the ages, born in the Wild West and destined to live on, as long as anyone remembers what it means to truly love and be loved in return.